Welcome back to 101 East, where we're discussing the recent arrests in New Zealand of Maori activists and the political storm that it's created. In the studio, Maori Party MP Hone Harawira and Tracy McIntosh from Auckland University. In Wellington, Ron Mark, MP for the New Zealand First Party. Tracy, before the break, we began to get into the question of the use of anti-terrorist legislation to deal with. As yet, we don't really know.
No, what we're dealing with.
So what exactly is going on here in terms of peacekeeping and policing?
Well, I think that, I mean, we've got to look at it both within the international and the national context. So what we've seen since 9/11 is the invoking of these new types of legislations that are largely somehow move within the gambit of the war on terror. I think we've got problems there in regards to that very often the legislation doesn't suit the domestic needs. So that we do need to protect our communities. I think that's without a doubt. I think that those sorts of issues do need to be addressed. But I think that what often is not interrogated sufficiently is around the way that they will be used, particularly within a national and domestic context. So I see here that we've used the Terrorism Suppression Act largely to broaden the scope of police and other agencies to collate information and evidence, and then this has been brought forward in the way that we've seen. As we've also seen that evidence, a lot of what has been collected will now not be able to be used in a court of law.
Is that evidence that's been brought, was it necessary to use the Anti-Terrorism Act, or are these supposed offences things that are covered by existing law? I
believe that everything that we've seen here could have been covered by existing law. I do think that it does mean that it changes perhaps the direction of law enforcement and other agencies about what they put under particular levels of scrutiny.
All right, well, let me put that to Ron.
Yes.
I mean, was it necessary to use the word terrorism to justify this kind of activity?
Well, most New Zealanders would say that if it walks like a terrorist, smells like a terrorist, dresses like a terrorist and behaves like a terrorist, it probably is a terrorist.
What exactly does that mean?
At the end of the day, New Zealand... Well, it means that the activities that the police were observing were of sufficient concern, and in the judge's own words, extremely disturbing. It's sufficient for them to believe that that is what they were dealing with, the communications that they had intercepted, and we have to also accept that to get a warrant to allow them to collect and collate information, they have to be able to prove their case. And part of the catch-22 for them was that if they did not use the terrorism legislation or the Suppression of Terrorism Act, they would not be able to collect the information that they had good cause to believe was about terrorist activities.
You have just described a roster of activities and a roster of crimes, if you like, which the government and the prosecutors have seen unfit to pursue any further. The police have said they don't have enough evidence to pursue any further. They've dropped those cases. After 18 months of surveillance, they haven't been able to build a case. And so what you said is that in order to actually even get it to a plausible situation within the legal system, they've had to call it terrorism because it wasn't covered anything else. That's the message I've just heard from you.
You have to declare the charges, what it is you're seeking to do to the Solicitor General in order to be able to get that approval to collate that information. Now, they have a certain amount of information. They have warrants that are issued on a certain basis, and if they do collect that evidence and then seek to prosecute under the terrorism legislation further on, if they haven't stated that earlier, then none of the evidence is admissible.
Okay.
And I guess the great catch-all and protector for the community and for people, citizens of New Zealand at large, is that they do have to go through those hoops and hurdles to get the authority and the sign-off to be able to lay the charges at the end of the day. And in terms of the other legislation, we need to accept, on the back of 9/11 and many other terrorist attacks around the world, terrorism is a crime against humanity. It is a crime against the citizens of a nation. And it is better. It is a bigger issue than just the Crimes Act or the Firearms Act.
Let me stop you there, please, Ron.
There's nothing described by Ron Mark which has happened in Aotearoa at all. For him to suggest that anything like 9/11 or his leader to talk about suicide bombings in London, etc., 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 are purely scare tactics for the rest of the country to drum up support to, like Bull said, drag the chain, keep Māori in their place. The fact of the matter is the police did not have what it took. After 18 months of surveillance, they did not have what it took to lay terrorism charges. The police commissioner announced he was executing warrants under the Terrorism Suppression Act on day one of that operation. He staked his reputation on it. He failed miserably. He should go, quite frankly.
Well,
he admitted himself.
There's only one problem
hang on,
with
Ron,
that.
you had your opportunity.
There's only one problem with that.
He admitted himself that the operation that he conducted in Tūhoe will take decades to reconcile between police and the community. Clearly, with that kind of a mistake having been made,
all right,
somebody said needs to roll the police commissioner as the man.
Trying to understand why it is that around the world we're seeing this knee-jerk reaction to this whole idea of 9/11. You merely have to say 9/11 and all of a sudden it's justification for any number of things.
I mean, I think what you are seeing is also the responses of governments to power and where power is situated, particularly within the US and other places. So in many ways what we're seeing here is that level of response from government to government in regards to we're going to be tough on terrorists too. What we've also seen is that very often this legislation has actually been used to deal with much more sort of national-oriented types of issues.
At the end of this conversation, are you looking to the future and thinking that there's going to be more trouble ahead for Maoris?
I'm genuinely scared for the future of Aotearoa New Zealand, because I think the use of this terrorism law is going to scare people into not speaking truthfully. I think other bills which are coming through Parliament are being used to limit people's willingness to step outside the box and challenge. I think Maori people, and regardless of what one might say, the huge majority of Maori people think it was a massive police overreaction, what happened in Tūhoe, are going to react by, first of all, going very, very quiet on this, and secondly, I think they're going to start to build another storm against what's happening here, to the point where the government needs to be very, very careful about the way in which it engages with Māori in the future. There's a need for people to come together and work on this intelligently. The use of terrorism law and black-clothed and masked gunmen to terrorise communities in Aotearoa, New Zealand, is definitely not the way to go.
Okay, there we will have to leave it. Thank you all very much indeed for being with us today. That's all we have time for on this edition of 101 East. Until next time, goodbye.